So Spider-Man probably has the second best world in all of comics, right after Batman, and I'm not just talking about the villains, I mean the whole thing. Miles Morales has become so popular that he doesn't even feel like Peter's replacing anymore. The guy's essentially his own franchise. Black Cat has been carrying stories alongside Spider-Man for decades. Venom became so popular that he escaped Spider-Man's shadow entirely. Spider-Gwen has barely been a thing for a decade, and already has a visual identity that's insanely recognizable. And we had 2099 still scenes in Across the Spider-Verse just by looking angry in the background. We've got noir, cosmic, coming of age, horror. The Spider-Man brand is massive and it has something for everyone. But here's the thing, all those great spin-offs, Miles, Gwen, 2099, they only work because the original New York they spun off from felt so lived in. It had the Daily Bugle that felt like a second home, a rogues gallery that each gave Peter a unique problem to solve, and a cast of civilians who changed and evolved so much over the years. And yet, after 20 years of live action, 3 actors, and $1 billion crossover with the Avengers, Peter Parker's personal street-level New York feels smaller than ever. We've gone cosmic and multiversal, but we somehow lost the claustrophobic, messy neighborhood that made the comics feel so dense. So yeah, Brand New Day drops in a few days, or a week, depends when I actually get this out. And before anyone hears bigger Spider-Man world and thinks I mean another multiversal war or Peter Parker fights half the MCU, no, bigger does not mean louder. It just means using more of what's already there. Either way, there's a huge gap between what's possible in Peter Parker's world and what the movies have given us. And I want to look at why that gap exists and whether this is only the movie that closes it. If Spider-Man's world is so deep, why does live action feel so flat? Well, because all the cool stuff we've got with Spider-Verse, with Miles, Gwen, and 2099, that's just the franchise flexing. That's not Peter Parker's story anymore. The problem with Peter is smaller and honestly kind of boring. We need more of the people who know Peter when he's not in a suit. Live action barely even looks at them, let alone cares most of the time. And when I say barely, it's not like live action never touches this world. It gets right up to it. Flash exists, Gwen exists, Felicia technically exists, and the Bugle definitely does. All these pieces keep showing up as placeholders for stories we're supposed to get later, but that later never comes. The franchise reboots, or Peter gets swallowed up by something bigger, and everything just kind of goes back to step one. Spider-Man's world is always being introduced, but is never allowed to develop. Here, let me show you what I mean. Let's look at the whole thing, starting at ground zero. The Job, Robbie Robinson, Betty Brant, Glory Grant. I know they had a thing for alliteration back then. None of that is the superhero stuff yet. It's just his boss and a bunch of coworker drama. And then there's Eddie Brock, a rival photographer whose career gets torched because Peter debunked his biggest story. We're not even at the supervillain stuff yet. That's just a guy who hates Peter's guts for purely petty personal reasons, years before a symbiote ever enters the picture. Live action gives all this stuff maybe a scene, maybe, then forgets it exists. Let's zoom out one ring, and you hit the people who knew him before any of this. Let's look at Flash Thompson. Every live-action Peter gets a bully in Act 1 just to make high school suck. Then Flash vanishes into the background for the rest of the movie. Comics Flash actually goes somewhere. The bully becomes one of Peter's closest friends, joins the military, loses his legs overseas, and eventually becomes a hero in his own right as Agent Venom, or anti-hero, it doesn't matter. Decades of a relationship that goes from resentment to real respect, and live action uses maybe 5 minutes of the resentment part and none of the rest. Let's zoom out again. Then we hit the justice system. That's where we got characters like Jean DeWolf or Yuri Watanabe, cops who sometimes help, sometimes screw him over, but are always stuck in the rules that Peter basically ignores. And these aren't characters you introduce the moments when you're ready to kill one or turn the other one in a rave. They matter because they spend years becoming part of Spider-Man's routine first. It's not just beat the bad guy, it's good guys can't even agree on what's good sometimes. And sometimes those disagreements permanently change people in Spider-Man's world. Live action so far hasn't bothered building up to that. Alright, let's keep going, and you hit the city itself. That's where you got Tombstone, Kingpin, and no, I'm not talking supervillains. This is just crime. There's stuff that keeps going when the suit comes off. Still there in the morning, still Peter's mess, not just Spider-Man's. Then we get to the relationship stuff, which, yeah, there's a lot going on here. Our boy Peter gets around, but you get to Black Cat and the whole situation kind of changes. She doesn't just add another person to Peter's life, she challenges the way that life is divided in the first place. Because Peter basically treats Spider-Man like an obligation, constantly stealing him away from the person he wants to be. Felicia basically looks at Spider-Man and sees the most honest, capable, alive version of him. Honestly, she might understand that side of him better than anyone, which complicates things when you add in everyone else. She is way too interesting for us to have 3 separate live action continuities and still no Black Cat. It's insane. Notice how none of this is exotic. No extra universes, no dimension hopping, no new Spider-Person. It's just Peter's actual life, ring by ring. And it's the one part live action never bothers to build on.
I just thought you was gonna be black. Oh man, I'm sorry.
So why hasn't anyone bothered? It's not like nobody's ever thought about it. Well, because neither studio really cares. Marvel sold Spider-Man's film rights to Sony in 1999. Hidden in that deal is if Sony ever stops making movies, Spider-Man goes back to Marvel. So Sony's not making these movies because they have some amazing story. They're making them to keep the lights on and to keep the rights. That's kind of it. Then 2015 hits. Marvel and Sony make the deal. Tom Holland's Spider-Man gets to show up in the MCU. Marvel uses him for the Avengers movies and doesn't owe Sony a dime. Sony gets to keep the solo films. So for Marvel, that means shoving Peter into Tony Stark stories or adding cameos like Doctor Strange or Hulk. It costs nothing and sells merchandise. Done. For Sony, it's kind of the opposite. They want to build everything around Spider-Man that they actually own. That's how we got stuff like Venom, Morbius, Madam Web, and Kraven, because that was kind of the only lane they had. Notice how neither of these incentives cares about Peter's actual life. One studio wants crossovers, the other wants spin-offs. Nobody's trying to give Peter a job or a cast of people who've known him for decades. That doesn't sell toys or set up sequels. It just makes the story better, and nobody's cashing checks for that.
Will you marry me? Mary Jane!
So let's look at the pattern. Here's a quick version. Raimi's trilogy ends and the world gets wiped. Amazing Spider-Man starts over and gets wiped again. Holland's version doesn't even get a proper reset. Instead, it gets absorbed. First in a Stark story, then Strange gets involved, then it's the Avengers. 3 eras, 3 different ways, but the same outcome. You could blame the reboots or say, oh, maybe we just need more time between Spider-Man. But no, that's not it either. The real problem is, like we said, nobody ever bothers to build Peter's world, or just lets it breathe for 5 seconds so nothing ever sticks around. That's the whole point here. So here's what really happened, step by step. Raimi's trilogy ended. Amazing Spider-Man started fresh, got 2 movies and ended basically the same way. Both times everything was wiped. Whatever was built with Gwen, MJ, and Harry is gone, reset, and then gone again. Except J.K. Simmons, but everyone agrees that gets a pass. We just let that happen. Holland's version is very different. It didn't start from a wipe, it was just kind of folded into what was already going on in the MCU. But it was the same result. There was never a space for Peter's world to grow because for 3 movies, it was never really just his story. But I do want to look more at Raimi's version because he actually got 3 movies without a reboot breathing down his neck and still didn't really pull it off. Sure, he tried. He tried harder than anyone else, I'll give him that. But let's be honest, try just means everyone around Peter is either the girlfriend, the best friend, or whatever villain is on deck. I love these movies, but let's be honest here. We had 3 movies and that's about as deep as it gets. Now, compare that to Nolan's Batman. Same 3-movie deal, same basic assignment. Make a street-level hero's world feel like it actually exists. And guess what? Gotham turns into a real place. Gordon's an actual person. The GCPD isn't just background noise. Harvey Dent gets a whole arc before he goes off the rails. And it's not just because Nolan's some genius, he just didn't waste his shot. That's the real difference between Spider-Man's world and Gotham. It's not just that Spider-Man's world got rebooted or folded in while Gotham didn't. Gotham was built to handle big stories from the start, but Spider-Man's New York never really got the chance. Sinister Six is basically the poster child for this mess. Every version teases it. Raimi starts hinting it before he's done. Amazing Spider-Man 2 literally puts costumes in glass cases before they've earned a second villain, let alone 6. Decades of winks and 0 payoff. And it's kinda hard to form a team like this when nobody grows. Peter's friends stay flat. The villains never really connect with each other or to him, except when the plot needs him to be a punching bag. And it's not like this can't be done. Raimi definitely pulled it off with characters like Dr. Ock and Harry Osborn, with Harry being the clearest example here. We meet him as Peter's best friend, and we watch his resentment towards Spider-Man build across 3 movies. Then we watch his relationship with Peter basically fall apart, and all that history turn him into an enemy. Now, you can argue about how well Spider-Man 3 pays it all off, and I certainly will, but the structure is there. Harry gets to be a person in Peter's life way before the story needs him to be a villain, and Homecoming actually nails a different version of this with Vulture. Adrian Toomes isn't some rando in a bird suit, he's tangled up in Peter's actual life. His tech is actually taken from the Avengers fallout, and by the end, he's literally driving Peter to prom. That's what a Spider-Man villain's supposed to look like. Someone who actually belongs in Peter's world. Now let's go back to Gotham for a second, since that's a real comparison here. Gotham was designed to handle big stories like this, with villains who actually interact in a city that feels real even when Batman isn't there. Spider-Man's New York has gone through 3 eras and only one of them has made a real attempt at this, and even that one didn't really scratch the surface. It's not just bad luck or bad writing, no one just ever finished a job. So is there any reason to think this time will be any different? Maybe. Feige says they're keeping a street level, even skipping the classic skyline shots at first, just to make it feel like less like the last round of movies. That's something, I guess. At least someone at the studio is finally saying out loud what's been missing all along. Hulk and Punisher are both in this movie. On paper, that's exactly the kind of crowding I spent this whole video complaining about. Other people's stories showing up and shoving Peter out of his own. So the question is, which version are we getting? Are Hulk and Punisher stepping into Peter's world, or is Peter getting dragged into theirs? Early signs are pointing the right way. Amy Pascal described Frank Castle, Banner, MJ, Ned, and Peter all as dealing with the same thing: isolation, feeling alienated, lying to themselves about their lives. That description makes me a little nervous on its own. That's a lot of characters to juggle in one movie. But the way Amy is framing it, that's what gets me. Isolation, alienation, lying to yourself about your own life. That's 100% a Peter Parker story. And all those characters aren't there to distract from Peter's story. They all sound like they fit perfectly. Banner is living a quiet, post-Avengers life as a professor. And Peter goes to him not because the city's in trouble and he needs a bailout, but because something's happening with his own body that he can't explain. Now, Punisher doesn't actually need that much of an explanation. He can show up in basically any story and not take up too much space and still work perfectly. That's just the kind of character he is. So, overall, I'm cautiously optimistic. But the real test isn't whether Hulk and Punisher fit in. It's everything else. Does Peter actually have a job we see? Are there civilians we actually get to know other than MJ and Ned? Does New York feel like it exists when he's not swinging through it? That's what matters. That's how you know if this movie is actually different or we're just getting better at hiding the same old problem. So with all that said, here's where I actually land. For once, restraint and self-interest are finally pointing the same way. A Peter-focused movie still gives Marvel its Avengers fix, but doesn't swallow them whole just to make the math work. The deal that kept Spider-Man's world tiny for 20 years, it's still there. The pressure just got quieter for once, and even that kind of feels new. What I bet's gonna happen is the movie's probably not gonna do anything that I mentioned there. It might give Peter a job, it might introduce a few familiar names and gesture towards a bigger world, but I don't expect them to suddenly build a cast of people who actually known him for years, or a city that feels like anything more than a backdrop. But if it does, if it starts finally building Peter's world instead of just borrowing pieces of it, then it'll be the first live-action Spider-Man movie that understands what we've been missing. That's what I want, and if I'm wrong, good. I'd rather be wrong, but who knows?